You're listening to Power 98.7. Of course, it is Power Talk. And if it's still the side of midday, then it is Power Talk. On the other side of that, you will have Power Lunch. And I hope you enjoy the lunch. But until then, it is Power Talk. My name is Denzil Taylor, standing in for Mbuyiseni and Ndlozi, who, of course, has also decided to have a birthday celebration today. And I am then that particular individual who is holding the fort today. You would have heard the news headlines. Just remember that the studio line to call for your conversations is 0861 987 000, 0861 987 000. The WhatsApp line 083 303 7093. And on Twitter at PowerFM987. Our show hashtag is Power Talk. On Facebook, we are Power FM. 11 minutes past 11 o'clock. I don't know what you make of the conversation about the RAF, the Road Accident Fund, but there are so many issues to deal with in that particular space. There is the amendment bill that McIntosh was talking about that is in front of Parliament at the moment. There's litigated claims that seem to have exorbitant fees attached to them. And you have to remember that the RAF is a taxpayer-funded statutory body. Of course, then we also have the funding model, which would have changed, the fuel levy. That I'm sure would assist, but you heard McIntosh Pulela saying there, it's never worked. RAF has never worked since its inception. Just recently, you would have heard that there was an oversight committee that would have gone to the RAF buildings, recent oversight visit by Scopa to the RAF headquarters in Pretoria. I'll tell you what they found. They found chaotic working conditions. They found boxes, documents lying all over the ground, and they found that office furniture and equipment was lacking also. That had recently also then been seized by the sheriff. The SIU is involved in that particular space. Everybody seems to be enjoying what the RAF, does. Everybody seems to have some form of web into that particular system. Maybe also because it's just a fund that, exists like the UIF fund. There it is. It's created by the fuel levy and doesn't necessarily come out of Treasury. And because of that, people then utilize it as they need and as they want. And the last person in the equation that is being heard is that particular individual who really needs it the most. My next guest is an immigration law expert, Ashraf Essop. We're going to be talking about the Department of Home Affairs, the DHAs, and they in essence are going through a whole process of trying to rid and trying to eradicate corruption that is linked to the involvement of passports and the likes. In the old days, I remember a conversation that used to say we used to get fraudulent documents. Driver's license was a popular one, a fraudulent driver's license. ID document was a fraudulent one. And sometimes, you would get fraudulent passports, but passports needed to be more scrutinized because you would travel with them, and other bodies like international, borders would also just have a look at them. So those were not in circulation as much as driver's license and or ID documents were. But now we see that passports are just in the same conversation as driver's license or ID documents. Ashraf Essop is an immigration law expert. Ashraf, welcome to Power 98.7. Welcome.
Hi, good morning, and thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. Ashraf, where do you find yourself in the country at the moment? Is it Joburg? Is it Cape Town? Is it Durban?
Johannesburg.
Johannesburg, right here?
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, you also wake up to the cold mornings, right?
Oh, yeah, no, it's beautiful. We have to have different seasons.
We have to have the different seasons. Ashraf, tell me, I remember a time, as I was just talking about in the introductory phase, where I kind of knew that driver's license was in circulation. I kind of also knew that identity documents were in circulation and not so much passports, because, passports would be then scrutinized by external entities at border posts, and people would look at a passport very differently, whereas they would, an ID document or a driver's license. But apparently these days, and also way back then, my understanding of what fraudulent would be it really was a fraudulent document. It was not the real thing in any way. People would try to copy it and try to manufacture it in some back room. These days, it's the real thing. It's the real passport. It's the real identity document, and it's the real driver's license that's in circulation that you can get, that we have been talking about, fraudulently, gained. That's the case as I would understand it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, we've moved into the digital age. You'd recall that in some of the very old movies, in fact, a lot of prisoners during the Second World War had been given different kinds of passports. In those days, it was all handwritten, and you would simply remove the photograph and put a new one in.
That's how easy it was.
But today, there's a digital footprint, and there are smart passports. So all passports these days have to be machine readable, and there's no longer a emergency travel document that's out. Now, as you've pointed out, fraud is on a number of different levels. The ones that appear now is where they bypass the security mechanisms, which means they cannot match a name to a face when they're issuing the passport. And I don't know how that's possible, because all of this falls under the auspices of the department. So the modus operandi that we've seen operating in Krugersdorp in the past, where people were convicted, was in conjunction with Home Affairs officials who had access to the departmental machines and data capturing mechanisms. So basically it comes down to biometrics. Biometrics now will be your face and your thumbprint. But let's say your ID was available, but you never collected it for one or other reasons, or you never applied. Now the department has no record that you turned from 16 and then you became 18. So 16 you got your ID book, but you never collected it. At age 18, you go and apply, and that's your first identification linking you to your biometrics. Otherwise, you just have you have a piece of paper that says you're a citizen of South Africa by birth or whatever. So obviously now these criminal syndicates, they decided, look, here's an opportunity. Two opportunities. Number one, we can pick up homeless people that have no identification, take them in, and they will then, instead of their so their name and ID number is correct.
Yeah.
But their biometric is switched now with the fraudster. And you can just imagine the amount of money that this has generated through various criminal syndicates. And it's very difficult from that stage onward to second guess it, because that's the first capture of information linked to the human being, which is his biometrics, you see.
Yeah, but it's also in what you've just said, Ashraf. It's also then an instance of criminality, which it was in the beginning, where somebody was just engaged with a criminal process of removing a passport. But it's also now a moral issue, because now you do need the biometrics, and you need to go through the formal system, and it needs to be on the system for it to be real. Otherwise, it doesn't show up. So the moral component then comes into being. What are we then saying about ethics and morals? Because it cannot now just be an individual sitting in a garage and replacing a photo. It now engages some form of coercion, some form of exchange of monies, some form of employee engaging his machinery and his ethics and his morals to give knowingly and willfully somebody a document who they know is not properly and not legally represented in the system.
Yeah, as you point out, morality and greed don't make good bedfellows.
I would ask you what do you think of the South African, constitutionally then, where morals and ethics are concerned, but that's not the place. You wouldn't be the psychologist or whatever to begin to engage South Africa's state. But is there I think the question then to ask you, is there any way of having an understanding of what is in circulation in this country? You get 266 passports found in one Home Affairs building, in Mbuyiseni in KZN. That's 266. No issues raised about what would that particular office would have handed out before that they've put into circulation. But when they were found out, 266 passports, these kind of institutions and little corrupt cells are happening all over the country. So then the question would be, do we even have an understanding of how many documents are in circulation in this country that don't reflect the people that they need to be talking about?
Yeah, I think that's a question only Home Affairs can answer, together with the SIU who've now been entrusted.
But would they even know? Because the biometrics would reflect, and it would reflect a real person, and that real person reflects a document, but in essence it doesn't.
Yeah, I think what they'll do is check the date stamps. All of these things are digitally captured, and it was done after hours and weekends and at night. So if they dig into it and they use AI, for example, and start searching through the database of what documents were issued outside after hours, that's a dead giveaway.
Yeah,
that was how the MO went down.
But then we're saying that if the person is doing their work within the light of day, then they get away with it.
Yeah. Look, I think what's happening now, with the move towards the smart card only and the green identity book being done away with, there will be a whole new system of checks and balances. I mean, I think at some stage you will be even, when you're an accused person now, you have to give your DNA. So there'll be a whole lot of cross checks. But I understand the difficulty of the situation. At this moment, we're not privy to what investigations were carried out, how they detected it. It's a period of over 3 years. They obviously picked up a pattern, and they must be concerned about those that have already filtered through the net. You remember there was a famous case of Lebogang from Bangladesh.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a glaring inconsistency. So that was a dead giveaway that the name and the face didn't match. How that will be detected in the long term is anyone's guess. I don't know if the department will change the way it's doing its data capturing or verification. So it could be that they'll ask each one of us to verify exactly what we have before they issue another document. And I guess the life of these documents, it's not for lifetime. It's usually maximum 10 years. So you may or may not have the pleasure of it for 10 years, but after that, it gets picked up again.
But if the document has allowed me to travel within the time frame that I needed it, then it's done what it needed to do.
But there's another filter. You see, let me just say this. So let's say you're Mr. X and you come from country Y, and you come and you acquire a whole lot of documents here, but you came from your country of origin where your biometrics was already captured. So when you travel internationally, those biometrics then conflict. And that's how you are then picked up, because a passport essentially is to enable you to travel. So then it'll reflect that one person has got two sets of biometrics in two different countries. That'll raise a flag. And then obviously there will be consequences at the airports that you're traveling in.
And I would assume that is one of the reasons why it's getting harder and harder for South Africans to travel, because more and more border posts are finding that these kind of issues are being picked up at the border posts where they are, and more red flags are being raised, and so the South African travel document becomes a problematic one, and so then Ireland and the UK and everybody else says, now we're going to be more stringent, and, it's going to become more difficult for you to enter our country because these are the things that are happening. That's the consequence of it.
No, indeed. And we've seen it where we had visa-free travel to the UK, and then all our passports were suddenly popping up. And the UK said, no, now you're going to have to apply for a visa. Then you're onto a different regime, you see, because you've got to give bank statements. You've got to have your verification, your police clearances. There's a whole lot of other documentation that accompany that application. Unsurprisingly, the EU, I was reading somewhere, had rejected up to 60% of South African applications for EU visas. Now, whether that was based on cogent facts or just some other factor that they decided not to give it, we don't have the answers to that. What I'm emphasizing is that there is a tightening up process. So, first of all, it must be lucrative for the syndicate to operate like this. Otherwise, they won't do it. So that means that these passports are still sought all over the world, or allow you to travel at least maybe, to certain visa-free countries, like our neighboring countries, and then from there out. So it's difficult to say where exactly and how much we've, endured this. But what is heartening is the fact that it was detected, it was monitored over a long period, and people have been arrested, including officials.
Yeah.
Nothing can happen without the departmental officials' cooperation.
Yeah. Doesn't help us
sitting in the back room and manufacturing this.
Doesn't help us where image is concerned internationally, and also where international terrorism is concerned, because we then begin to be put on a list of countries that are, open to that kind of engagement where our documents are suspect, and international terrorists would understand that and know that and utilize that. And so other countries who are locking down their borders would be aware of that as well. Doesn't put us in a great space where that's concerned. Do you think the authorities know of, apart from the local ramifications, the international, scenario?
No, obviously, there is a ranking of international passports.
Yeah.
And, we don't rank very high up.
Yeah, I've seen that. We're not there.
So obviously, the exploitation of the South African identity and passport gives multiple opportunities. There's human trafficking, there's fraud, there's international terrorism. There's a whole lot of other issues. There's just so many things. There's you could be trafficked, you could be kidnapped. All of these ramifications are there. That's all the result of a very, very weak system of control. But I believe that the minister is saying that he's going to digitize and make it more and more paperless, and remove the opportunity of a middleman. So there'll be a direct communication between the applicant and the state, basically.
Sure.
Let's hope that that's rolled out quickly.
Ashraf Essop, I want to say thank you for your time. Thank you so much for joining us here on Power Talk.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Ashraf Essop is an immigration law expert. I knew at some point where we could go, visa-less to a lot of countries. And those countries have basically clamped down and said, no more, no longer. Your travel documentation is not what it used to be.